Today we're going to be talking about Chess Tactics from Scratch by Martin Weteschnick. And it's a very interesting book. And one of the things I'm going to hope for this video is that I say a couple insightful things about what calculation is and then how that led us to the grand Chess Dojo problem database that we now have in our beta mode. Okay, now a couple things just to introduce the book. Divided into two sections. Let's call it the elements of chess: pins, skewers, discovered attack, that kind of thing. And then 300 problems. Both have their own special value. And one thing, I just want to introduce the video. Me and Kosti had this battle. See, like, he was like, oh yeah, people need to do like 300 pins. Then they do 300 skewers. And I was like, I don't know, Kosti, man, that doesn't sound right to me. It doesn't sound as organic as at least I approach the game. And then while I was doing this book, I remembered that I have a student. He's an older guy. He's got a positional rating of like 2,500 and a tactical rating of like 800. He's blundering all his pieces. And he yelled at me years ago and he said, listen, you need to focus on chess captures threats. And I was like, chess captures threats? It doesn't make any sense to me really either. And then I've since discovered that's like a thing out there. You see in internet land, people talking about chess captures threats. So the thing I'm going to try to sell you on today is that there are three different ways maybe of approaching a heuristics to tactical solving. And here, let me lay it out you. So if you're like under 1,200, and as I said in the video of the road to 1,000, road to 1,100, road to 1,200, the videos on our Chess Dojo site about the training program, right? If you're in that level, you're mostly going to be concerned with the material dimension of chess, not dropping stuff, taking your opponent's pieces. And for that level, I think that heuristic of chess captures threats in that order, not a bad heuristic, not at all, right? Once those things become subconscious, though, it's not that helpful, right? And at a certain level of your chess development, chess captures threats is going to become just part of your chess understanding, your chess approach. You'll see it without having to think about it. Then let's talk about these elements, pins, skewers, that kind of thing, that Weteschnick and others have tried to develop as a system of like the elements of chess tactics, right? I think it's pretty useful and great for then that next level from 1,200, let's say, to 2,200. And first thing I want to stress that you can't exhaust it. There's a gazillion different words you could use for the different kinds of chess tactics, and I'll show a couple favorites of mine that aren't even in the book. But I definitely still think it's useful for people to read this book and others like it, which try to give a basic breakdown of the different kinds of tactics, because once you have a word for something and do some examples with it, you'll find it easier to see. So, for example, here's something that's not in the book. I call this the hook and ladder trick. White has just played rook e8. If you imagine this being the ladder, right, the rook protecting the queen, then rook e8 is the hook that's going to pull the ladder out from under itself. And this term was coined by National Master Dana McKenzie years ago. And it's interesting to me because once he said it, I had seen the tactic before, but once he said it and gave a word to it, I was like, oh, I'm seeing this thing all over the place, and I've become more fluent with the tactic. So what I want to show with this example is two things. One, having a word for something is helpful, right? So I definitely think for that level of 12 to 2,200, getting words and examples of it, fantastic, right? The second thing I want you to see from it is there's no way to exhaust the number of words you can have for tactical tricks, right? Such as this. Okay. Now, What then happens after 2200? I think other GMs might describe it differently, but for me, it's a story-based understanding of chess positions where tactics and strategy kind of interlock a little bit. Let me show you an example. So this position here is in the Vedeshnik book, and I immediately thought of my student James, who's about 2100, and I then asked him to solve this problem. If you've seen my Road to 2100 video, you'll know that he has a problem, as do many players at that level, of not being sensitive to their bad piece. And just telling yourself that, oh, I should be more sensitive to your bad piece, it's not going to solve your problem. As in this case, I showed him this problem after I told him to be more sensitive to it, and he's making a real effort to be more sensitive to the bad piece. So, for example, what's going on? You see this, and the first thing you're going to do is you're going to start calculating knight f4. You're going to try to find some way to make it happen. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be possible. At some point, you need to step back a second, though, and say, well, what's the story of the position? And okay, let's say that White's got 3 pawns for his troubles. What are his troubles? He owes us a lot of development, the king is poor, and this rook is still stuck. Obviously, if he gets a little bit of time, he's going to be winning because of his extra material. But luckily for us, it's our move. Shoot. Chess.com sometimes loses it. Okay, so we have the problem of our knight being a little loose over here, right? And the thing that we gotta be sensitive to, and James couldn't do it, is he needs to be sensitive to the rook on f8. It's the one piece that isn't working in the position, right? So to my mind, this position was kind of simple, but if your mind starts racing, like, oh, what do I do? What do I do? This, you're not, I don't think you're gonna find it, right? You have to be sensitive to the story of the position. And so the answer is a tactic that I'm now dubbing the Morphy. You play rook takes e4, you got to take back, and then rook e8. And then you just need to look at it and say, oh, I'm overwhelming White. Why? Because the force count is so incredible. We got rid of one of his few active pieces on d4. The rook is going to land on e4. If he plays knight f3, which is like the only sensible thing, I'm going to hit him with rook e4. I'm going to hit him with rook g4. Position's completely falling apart. Okay. So first of all, the Morphy. What am I talking about? Opera game. In that game, Morphy plays rook d7, taking a knight, and then boom. Play rook d1, right? And beautiful way of an economy of movement, right? So that's just why I dubbed it the Morphy, and it comes up again and again. Okay. The next thing I want to say about this problem is what I like about the book a lot, okay, is that a lot of books and problem things you see online will have computer-generated answers and kind of computer-generated problems, like the computer found the problem. Whereas this book, I really feel, is a collection of human problems that the author found, through years of playing and studying, teaching. I think it's very important. It's a really important difference because those kinds of problems aren't going to end necessarily with some dramatic boom bam, but oftentimes something like this. And sometimes it's not even clearly winning. It might just be like White's better. In the best move, which I really like, you don't even know. You just are trying to find the best move. It's not like White to play and crush the guy. Just, no, you find the best move. I think it's very important. And one of the things that I want to say about it is, for years people have asked me, well, how do I learn tactics? What's the best tactics book? And I always say Perfect Your Chess by Bolo Keaton and Grabinski. And then I say The Best Move by Hort and Janssen. And those are human collections of problems that don't always end in, one side crushing, might just be a better position, right? And that gives it really the flavor of an actual game, because there's always tactics involved, and it doesn't always end in you crushing the person in some incredibly convincing way. You might just simply be winning. And the problem, though, with those books and me recommending those books is they're too hard, right? They're basically just too hard for most people to do. And that's why this book and us putting it at the 1500, 1600 level in the training program really works, because we need a collection of human problems from actual games where either someone found it at the board or they found it in the post game without the computer. Fantastic. Why is this so important? I don't want to, I can't think like a computer. I can only think like a human. And so I want to be the best I can be at human thought, right? I don't think anyone should aspire for more than that. Okay. Let me give you another example of what I'll call narrative. This was a problem I struggled a little bit from the Vedeshnik book. Again, 3 different levels. There might be more, but I just came up with this. I kind of like this. You got the first up to 1200 or so, captures threats. And then you've got the elements. Those elements can be defined in different ways. And then I believe somewhere after 22 or 2300, you start thinking of it as a story. Okay, so let's think about it. What's the story here? First thing I want to say is, right away, we have what looks to be a mating pattern, right? A mating pattern with this pawn. And in fact, I remember the rook was actually here. So I set up the problem wrong. The mating pattern with the pawn. I will reference now Polgar Mates. That book will help you in doing these problems, no matter what level you're on. So right away, you should start calculating, and you'll see, well, if I land on h7, it's not necessarily mate. And the king might be able to take a walk, and maybe the guy survives. We don't want him to survive. The next thing is really important to see, I think, is that this bishop is very poor. And the queen is also not the greatest in terms of letting the rook out. Very important part of the conversation, because the bishop being basically out of the game means, at least for the next couple moves, we're going to be up a piece. That'll give us some time. Now, finally then, when we start thinking about mate, then it's the necessity to control the escape of the king, right? Whether it's somehow getting our rook on the F file, somehow getting our rook on an open E file, that we can maybe stop the king from going over. Okay, so for a while I was looking at queen g5 and yada yada, and then fg made it difficult for me to play f4. Finally, my mind said, bro, you play f4 immediately. The queen can get here in one move instead of dancing around for 2, and then now you just need to do a couple variations, because the guy's toast. Totally toast. So, an example again, I think, of narrative. And let me then show a final example before I talk about the Dojo problem database. Kostya wanted me to talk about the problems I got wrong. Here was a problem I got wrong. It's interesting because that my friend Fidel Corrales Jimenez was playing this as white, and he got it wrong too in the game. And so I want to talk a little bit about it, because I think both of us did a human mistake in this position. So let's just show first what we did, the mistake. We both played knight g6, and the dream is like, if he plays, well, we're playing knight e7, and if he moves the bishop, we're going to play h7, knight takes, rook takes, king takes, rook h1, king g8, rook h8 mate. That's the kind of dream that's suggested by knight g6. Okay. Then, when we both are, of course, thinking about, like, well, what happens if pawn takes, queen takes, and it looks great because the lady just arrived, right? And I was looking at knight e8, knight d5, and I think the mind, both my mind and Fidel's mind, weren't looking at knight h7 because we're like, wait, boss, there's a rook there. I definitely did notice that the queen was touching me over here, touching that key square. But somehow the mind just stopped because it was like the knight is not allowed to go to h7 because of that big fat rook there. But in fact, I'm now toast. The answer is a little bit computery. I don't know if it was found by a computer or anything like that, but I'll just show it then. And it's interesting why, I think we can say why neither Fidel or myself found this move. This knight is killing me here. Here we go. There's a knight here. And the answer, yeah, it's a little bit, is HG. And why did neither Fidel or I want to do this move? Because it feels like we're letting the black pieces out. Amazingly, though, it's not amazing, but we have this. And then what you got to see is on, let's say, queen d3, we got check to the miserable king. And then we just take it, and then we have two threats. Rook here and rook over. Now, different ways to talk about tactics. The most simplistic way I've ever heard is that all tactics are essentially a double threat. You attack two things, he can't do both. An example here. It's an interesting conception. I think Yasser Serwan gets the credit for that one. I don't know how helpful that is, but it's interesting to just break it down in the most simple form. Another key tactic here is that when we take on g7, he takes back, that this is then also completely toast. And what is this? Well, you could call it a mating pattern, right? And so much of tactics are mating patterns, and I'll stress again, the Polgar mates are a great way to, necessary for any player to get a really firm grasp on any kind of attacking play. You got to do it. Okay, let me finish with one final beautiful thought that came out of this. This might be the biggest thing that came out of it is, years ago, I pitched Chess.com. I was like, listen, Chess.com, buddy, we need some problems that are like Perfect Your Chess. Human problems. Somebody found it at a board. It's not computer generated. And Danny over there was like, nah, bro, you don't understand. We do millions of problems. It would take too long, too much work, yada, yada. Okay. Fast forward here, and especially with the Dojo training program, we have the need for problems like that, and we have people who are motivated to share their own tactical tricks with us, which is fantastic. So what we've done with the help of genius DM Hokie to set up the computer tech parts of it is we have our own problem database. We have just begun with it. It's like anything in beta mode, it's got its own little glitches and stuff, but we're working on it. It's definitely going to happen. It's not that difficult tech-wise to arrange. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have a human collection of problems that I think are going to be great. And one of the things I really want with it is that I want the answers to also be human. Somebody explaining to me either how they found it, what the dynamics of the position are, something like that. I don't want this computer morass in there. And I think, I mentioned this earlier, I was going to come back to it, is the reason, one of the reasons you don't want the computer in there is, like when I read the best move, it's like, oh, wait a second, I can argue with this book. And that makes it really interesting as a debate. And then you start analyzing and you get in there and it's a lot more fun and tense rather than just like, well, this is the objective truth of the computer, buddy, and blah, blah, blah. But if you're arguing with the human mind, it's far more interesting because let's also say chess against the computer playing it is not that interesting either, right? So our problem database will be an extension of those three books, Perfect Your Chess, The Best Move, and this one, where we are going to have a data set different levels of problems, and they're going to be human answers. And so I think that's going to be a great thing, not only for the Chess Dojo, but then also we can bring it out to the greater chess community. All right, till next time, you can get a link to the book in the description. Bye-bye.